咁咧就歡迎委員咧係出席。
Welcome to the meeting. Today we will deal with 4 papers. EC 2020-21 number 5 has been circulated, and the paper lists out the establishment changes since 2002 and the impacts of the 4 discussion items on the directorate establishment. I remind members that if members have any direct or indirect pecuniary interest on the items to be discussed today, please disclose the nature of such interests before you speak according to Rule 83A of the Rules of Procedure. I also call to members' attention arrangements on voting in case of direct pecuniary interests according to Rule 84. First item on the agenda, the proposed creation of 2 permanent posts of 1 chief electrical and mechanical engineer and 1 chief electronics engineer in the EMSD. The subcommittee started discussion on this item on the 3rd of June, and we will continue our discussion today. I will not introduce the officials one by one. Dr. K.K. Kwok is not present. Any questions from other members? If not, I will put the item to the vote. Those in favor, please raise your hands.
今日4月。 提一提大家，我哋而家投票呢個項目就係議程。
I remind members that we are having a vote on the proposed creation of the post of Chief Electrical and Mechanical Engineer and Chief Electronics Engineer.
好，現在開始表決。
We now proceed to the vote. Please check your votes. Voting is closed. Twelve present, 8 in favor, 3 against, no abstentions. I declare the proposal passed. Would members request separate voting for this proposal at the Finance Committee? All right. We now proceed to the second item. I have a question. Are we going to convene additional meetings if the subsequent items are passed? Would they be tabled at the Finance Committee? I would first outline the items on the agenda before I invite the government to talk about the order of the items. There are 4 discussion items for today. The first item has been completed, and we have 3 remaining items. One is by the FSTB. Another is a proposed creation of government architect with regards to the 10-year hospital development program. And the last item involves the proposed creation of 1 Chief Accident and Safety Investigator and 1 Deputy Chief Accident and Safety Investigator at the Transport and Housing Bureau. Is this the final meeting of the session? Yes, today would be the final meeting. This is the final meeting of the legislative year. Of course, some things would depend on the progress of discussion. As things stand, today would be the final meeting of the year. For the proposal on the 10-year hospital development plan, some members might consider moving certain motions. For example, a motion to adjourn. We would like to know what the arrangements would be. If the items could not be tabled anyway, then we might have alternative considerations. The setting of items on the agenda is decided not by ourselves but by the government. According to the order given by the government, well, they would be the ones setting the items. If you have questions about the priority or order of the items, then you would have to put a question to the government. Thank you very much. The order on the agenda is set by the government according to our needs. For items passed by the establishment subcommittee, they would be included on the agenda of the Finance Committee as much as possible. For items that do not require separate voting, they would be inserted into the Finance Committee agenda immediately to facilitate voting. For items requiring separate voting, then the order would be arranged and there would be greater uncertainty. From our past or recent experience, most items did not require separate voting and they have already been dealt with. Chairman, does it mean that you have no intention to convene extra meetings? Yes, as things stand. This would be the final meeting of the legislative year. It would depend on the number of questions asked by members. And at this stage, it would be hard to be sure. Item 2 on the agenda. This is EC 2020-21, number 4. Propose making permanent of 2 supernumerary posts of 1 administrative officer staff grade B D3 with effect from the 1st of January 2021 or upon approval by the Finance Committee, whichever is later, and 1 administrative officer staff grade C D2 with effect from the 1st of January 2022 or upon approval by the Finance Committee, whichever is later, in the Financial Services branch of the Financial Services and the Treasury Bureau, to provide long-term and senior-level policy steer and inputs to various major legislative and policy initiatives. The government consulted the LegCo panel on financial affairs on the 6th of January, and the officials with us today, we have Mr. Sam Hui, Deputy Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury, Mr. Te-Chi Wang, Principal Assistant Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury. Since Mr. Christopher Chung is not present, I would brief members on the salient points of discussion at the panel. On the 6th of January, the Financial Affairs panel discussed the proposal. Members support the creation of 2 permanent directorate posts at the Financial Services branch of the FSCB, and they find the 2 posts necessary. Members asked about the roles of these 2 posts in terms of promoting fintech development in the banking and insurance industries and in promoting Hong Kong's fintech work. Members believe that with the creation of these 2 posts, the administration should enhance the regulation of money lenders and review the money lenders ordinance and consider setting up an independent regulatory body. The floor is now open for questions.
Dr. K.K. Kwok. Okay, thank you. With regard to the AOSGB, there are 2 types of work. First, is about the insolvency and also winding up of companies, and second is fintech, and third is about the AIIB or ADB, that's the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and also Asia Development Bank, as we all know. Well, the AIIB has been created as a result of the Belt and Road Initiative of the Chinese authorities, and it's been led by the Chinese authorities, and it's not like a normal bank because basically it's just to raise funds, and many of that would come from China, and that would be invested in the Belt and Road countries. But then by 2020, that is today, basically the Belt and Road Initiative is like an uncompleted project. So worldwide, the feelings or sentiments have changed, and for the promises that have been made under the Belt and Road Initiative, and people have been talking about the toxic bonds that have been issued, and also the lendings under the project have been cancelled as a result of the problems involved. So with regard to the AIIB and also ADB that are sponsoring the Belt and Road Initiative, how important are they now? That's point number 1. And second, we are already in deep or in hot water Well, last year we had the extradition bill, and then this year we have the Hong Kong version of the national security law. And then for the ADB, to put it more bluntly, basically, whether you call it the AIIB or ADB, actually we are talking about projects that might not be able to see their completion. So if the administration were to invest more in these projects, then what kind of meaning does that carry for the current administration? Second, to be honest, now we have invested in the AIIB, and I don't think we'll be able to get any return from that. So for the amount of money that we have invested in that, has anybody come back to report to us as to whether or not that investment will yield any return at all? So your subject is about lenders and so on. So I wonder if it's been pocketed by some of the corrupted officials in the Belt and Road countries. So any response from the administration? Thank you. Concerning the work of the AIIB, let me explain a bit further about this, about the government's involvement and also the nature of our involvement. Just now, members talk about the ACL government's investment in the AIIB. In fact, that's not an investment. Well, at the time of the formation of the AIIB, we as one of the members, we made some contributions, so it's almost like a monthly installment that we pay to the AIIB. So when we involve ourselves in the AIIB, we'll see what kind of it's not about the kind of return that we can get from our contribution. It's about what we can do in terms of developing our potential in the different sectors, so that in the projects that have been invested by the AIIB, we might be able to fully develop our potential. And of course, globally, there might be other projects, but then one of the principles of the AIIB is that basically we're talking about government capital. So that's about AIIB raising funds, and then we would work with the market in order to develop these projects. So under these projects, invariably or inevitably, that would involve different forms of private sector services, and in terms of professional services, Hong Kong does have an edge over many others, and therefore there is a role for us to play in the projects under the AIIB. And another part is about Hong Kong's advantage over the development or operation of the AIIB. They would also need a lot of talents, and they would also be doing a lot of procurement projects, and therefore Hong Kong will be able to offer our services to the AIIB in the provision of services and so on, so that we'll be able to get involved in those projects. You talk about the monthly fee. So to put it bluntly, does it mean that we will never be able to get back anything from that? Well, please be brief, because he has not answered my question at all. Well, we believe that when we call that the monthly membership fee, well, as a member of the AIIB, that's the share that we need to pay. So we call that the contribution. So we will not be calling it a membership fee per se. Yes, Ray Chen, Chairman, what we are dealing with now is the creation of 2 posts. In fact, they are dealing with various types of work. Some would not be very controversial, and one of the functions would also be what I'd like the administration to put in more resources in. The fact that I call them not controversial, so that's about the new auditor regulatory regime, and also the regulatory regime for accountants and so on. So with or without this permanent post, you'll be doing that, and also the policy on International Financial Center. I'm sure you've been implementing that in full already. So what I'm concerned about is about the lenders ordinance, money lenders ordinance, and also the policy on that. I'm sure many lawmakers have received requests for help, because there have been unscrupulous money lenders, and they're causing a lot of nuisance to the public. But then even if they report the cases to the police, well, there would be very limited. There would be very little that the authorities can do for them. So can we do a bit more in terms of our statutory regime? So you're trying to enhance regulation of moneylenders, and that's also one of the important duties of the incumbents of these posts. And of course, you talk about enhancing policy guidance and also suggestions and so on. I'd like to know more about that. So can you elaborate on that? In fact, when you talk about the 2014 policy initiative that's been that's being implemented, so if you just stay at that level, that's about the 4 main initiatives. We believe that that's very inadequate. As regards the overwhelming advertising campaign, and actually they're trying to mystify people. Well, you might add in the words that you will have to be sure that you're able to repay before you take out loans. But then how effective has that been? Because I've been working in the radio station, but I never would record such messages because, well, when you try to highlight that, well, you can travel around the world and you can also go to concerts, but then you never tell people about what happened later. For example, you can have your credit cards cut, and also you would also have to work extra hard before you can repay those loans. So I don't know what you can really do to help these people. But then by para 13, you talk about considering how you can kickstart or enhance your supervision and so on. Well, it will take years. But then if you say that you're just considering it, then it will take many months before you can do anything about it. So is it really useful? Can you tell us more about this? About the Moneylenders Ordinance. So how can you amend the legislation in order to enhance your regulation of this trade? Thank you for your question. Well, for the problem of moneylenders, we are very concerned about this, and we are fully aware of the fact that within this council, different members have already expressed their concerns to us, and they've also made suggestions to us. And with regard to Mr. Ray Chan's question, at the policy level, we talk about senior level policy steer and so on. Well, what does it involve? That's about the statutory regulation and also the resources to be put into that, whether or not the policies and initiatives are appropriate. That's the reason why we call that senior level policy steer. And that's being considered. So the policy on moneylenders, that's present tense, is an ongoing initiative, and we are considering different proposed measures. For example, certain provisions under the Moneylenders Ordinance, and we'll bring them back to this council. And of course, there isn't much time left for this term, but then in the next term, we'll be coming back to this council. And that's why when we talk about the timetable, it's not about 1 year or several months. In fact, we're talking about the long-term policy, and then we will be making suggestions or proposals for this council to consider. With regard to the moneylender market, we have been monitoring the developments closely. And of course, when it comes to moneylenders' operations, yes, we do have some black sheep. But then, by and large, is a healthy market, and therefore, our responsibility is to ensure that for the unscrupulous moneylenders affecting consumers' interest or malpractices, they will be put under regulation. So that's the highlight of our work. So does it involve tightening the legislation in order to ensure that it's properly regulated? Well, other than administrative measures, we would also be considering certain licensing terms and also certain legislative provisions and so on. So it would also not rule out amending the legislation. Next, Mr. Wu Chi-wai. Well, for the incumbent, what we need to find out is that it's going to be changed from a supernumerary post to a permanent post. And if you look at the list, and there are a number of tasks, and then one of them is about the regulation of the accounting or auditing profession. And last year, we enacted a very important piece of legislation that's about the Financial Reporting Council Ordinance and also the Amendment Ordinance. And apparently, much of the work should have been done by the FRC. And if you have any new policy initiatives, that should have been recommended by the FRC. So my first question is, yes, you attach a lot of importance to the high-level steer and policy proposal and so on. What does that mean? What does that entail? And also when compared to the FRC that you have set up under another piece of legislation, would that be duplicating its work? That's the second question. And third, you talk about the corporate rescue procedure so that corporations won't fail because they are too big. Still, for a long time, the two incumbents have to work on targeted missions or tasks. For example, on the past 5 occasions when the posts were extended, that's because there were very specific targets in order to ensure that legislation would be enacted and so on. But then in this paper, you are obviously of the view that there is a continuous need for the 2 posts to be continued. So can you come up with a list setting out why you think so? Because according to what is set out in the paper, well, normally they should have lasted until 2022, 2023, when all the major pieces of legislation would be enacted. Or else it's like the Moneylender Ordinance. Well, for several decades, you've been telling us that nothing more can be done about it and no improvement can be made. So, can you come up with a checklist so that upon the completion of the work that you set out here, and according to the timetable in the paper, apparently by 2022-23, they would be completed. So does it mean that there would be a lot of follow-up actions that will be required? So you can set up all those on the list. And also you talk about the application of fintech, and that would also have a lot to do with the permanent post because you will have to go to the international community to promote that. But then I recall that we have another department responsible for that. And that's the economic and trade officers, the ETOs. So you talk about the two. So do they have a subordinating relationship? And also you have to have different departments working on their own, and we cannot make use of our ETOs. So does that mean that our ETOs can just be closed down?
為咧，多主席。
好，政府嘅同事唔該。
多謝。
Thank you very much. I would offer a brief response to the questions. For the new auditor regulatory regime, the relevant legislative work has been completed. Policy-wise, in order to enforce the new regime, Hong Kong's market is unique in that there are lots of mainland companies listed here. And as such, the work of the Financial Reporting Council would involve many local stakeholders as well as stakeholders from outside Hong Kong, and there is a lot of liaison work. And in this regard, the government will support the FRC. We created a statutory body that is the Financial Reporting Council, and we must invest time and or money and manpower on it. Apart from the executive arm, that is the FRC, high-level policies might be executed by the FRC. Every time the government is talking about high-level steer to a statutory body, what would be the division of work between the government and the body? Once a statutory body is set up, there are certain issues that must be dealt with by the government, and in that regard, the government will be supporting the statutory body. But having said that, the statutory body has its independent powers and functions, and there are issues to be dealt with by the FRC. Please answer the remaining 2 questions as well. In terms of fintech, Mr. Wu asked whether there's any redundancy in our establishment. The main unit for promoting fintech is a unit under Invest Hong Kong, and the unit would report directly to our team. On the international level, they would work with the investment units under the economic and trade offices, and the staff is part of Invest HK. So there is no redundancy. Next, Dr. Fernando Chang. Chairman, I'm not very familiar with financial matters, but the AIIB is certainly closely tied to the Belt and Road Initiative. We became one of the members of AIIB, and public money has been spent. The creation of the making permanent of posts have to do with the work of the AIIB. However, the Belt and Road Initiative has changed much since it was first announced. Many countries are quitting. The initiative is very ambitious. It involves 66 countries and covers 2/3 of the world's population. So these are mega-scale investments, but we don't know where the money comes from. Some comes from China by way of loans. Many small nations would not be able to repay such loans. And the result is that the relevant infrastructure of these nations, including ports, railway projects, financial infrastructure, and businesses, they would gradually be controlled by the CCP, or the Chinese Communist Party. This has become a political struggle in many places in the world. Even our former secretary, Mr. Ho Chi-ping, was embroiled in the issues. So these are scandals we have seen. We call ourselves a financial hub. Should we participate in such initiatives at the expense of the sweat and blood of Hong Kong people? Personally, I do not agree. We should develop our financial sector properly, and I do not believe Hong Kong people would want to take part in such projects. How would these posts contribute to the work on AIIB? Can we withdraw gradually from the AIIB? And what would be the significance of these posts in terms of the work of AIIB? The AIIB is relatively young compared with other multilateral bank agreements. In terms of governance and international standards and protocols. The key is whether it could align with other international investment banks. The AIIB has a number of mutual measures with the European Investment Bank. So as the AIIB gradually matures, we believe that its level of governance would reach international standards. Hong Kong is one of the members of AIIB. What would our role be? The AIIB has its own board of governance. As a member of the AIIB, we would take part in the governance work. That way, we can make use of our expertise in governance and at the same time learn more about the latest developments of AIIB in order to help Hong Kong enterprises. Next, Dr. K.K. Kwok for the second round. The government said participation in the AIIB can help enhance governance standards in Hong Kong, or could enhance the governance standards of the AIIB. Some think tanks carried out studies and they found that more than 90% of the infrastructure developments under the AIIB are born or committed by mainland enterprises. And this is in contrary to the 30 to 40% participation at the Asian Development Bank. For nations or leaders once taking part in AIIB, including a former Malaysian Prime Minister and a former Prime Minister of Pakistan, they stepped down because of corruption charges. Some even face criminal prosecution. I realize that Hong Kong has strived to remain clean. How can Hong Kong's experience contribute to the AIIB when the governance of the AIIB is deemed subpar by many think tanks? Thank you very much. Thank you. As for the distribution of projects secured under AIIB, to some extent, it reflects the market share of mainland enterprises with a global outlook. Over the past year, you could see that the main committers of many major infrastructure projects were mainland companies. So this is the market situation. In terms of the tendering exercises at the AIIB, this is a process of opening up to players around the world. The AIIB is multilateral in nature. Many European and American nations are either members or observers of the AIIB. They would facilitate transparent participation by their own enterprises. And this would gradually facilitate transparency in governance. And this is an objective of the AIIB. And Hong Kong, in this regard, has a role to play. In terms of corruption or battling corruption, acting in accordance with the regulations, financing, and establishing legal frameworks for international investors, there are plenty of opportunities. What about the scandal or corruption scandal of the former Malaysian Prime Minister and former Pakistani Prime Minister. Why would these occur under the AIB? We would not comment on specific political issues, but the level of governance of the member states of the AIB is not something within our control. But in terms of governance, we have to comply with relevant international standards. Mr. Wuchiwai. Just now I asked about the making permanent of supernumerary posts, but now I'd like to come back to the issue of AIIB. The government said Hong Kong has roles to play under the AIB, and we can help change the level of governance at the AIB, and such claims are rather peculiar. If we are to participate in the AIB, we would have to inject capital, and there are regular annual contributions. But according to the paper, apparently there's no mentioning of our role. And in past papers, there was no mentioning that the level of governance of the AIB is inferior to or short of international standards. In terms of promoting the standards of the AIB to meet international standards, can you point out the specific inadequacies of the AIB? And in order to improve such deficiencies, would Hong Kong's experience be enough to reverse the situation, since Hong Kong is only one of the members? What is the justification? So what is the specific problem, and why would the creation of permanent posts be able to improve the level of governance of an international body?
Third, it also has to do with the AIIB, because initially when you came to us for provision, you said that we join as a signatory or a member to the AIIC, and the flow about it is that in the process of fundraising and also in signing the contracts, Hong Kong's talents and resources can be tapped into. So what specific information do you have? Can you show us a list? So in terms of fundraising, how can they make use of Hong Kong's financing platforms? And also, legally speaking, how many contracts have chosen Hong Kong as a place for dispute resolution, so that we will indeed have some gains over this. So can you tell us exactly what we have gained from that? So what's our role in the AIIB, and also whether or not we have been able to be made the platform for fundraising and so on? Well, this is a multilateral platform, and therefore there is no suggestion that the AIIB's governance level is inferior to other international institutions. But then you're trying to raise it on a par with other international organizations. But then that's because it started from scratch. We never said that is lower than international standard. That's why we have to raise it. So that would be contradictory, because initially you said that with your involvement, the governance level will be able to align with international standards. So that's what you said. So have I understood it correctly? Did I hear it wrong? So Mr. Wu, you have already made yourself very clear. So I'll let the administration explain again. or from the Hong Kong perspective, as a member of the AIIB, as Mr. Wu Chi-wai just said, well, we are just one of the many members, and therefore our contribution to the AIIB is that in terms of its governance and also in terms of anti-corruption measures and in terms of project management, would be able to offer our understanding and experience on the relevant international standards and so on, and therefore we can make reference to those in order to share our experience. And if we are able to be involved in their projects as a service provider, then we'll be able to bring our international experience into that bank. That would also help the AIIB to align its standards with other international banks and so on, so that it can compare itself favorably with other counterparts in the international community. So next is my turn. Well, Chairman, I've asked many questions, but then one of the first things that I asked was about the conversion of the supernumerary posts to permanent posts. So what are the major reasons behind this? So all of a sudden, why are they trying to convert this into a permanent post? Okay, you can continue to press your button so you can record your questions first, because I have to manage the meeting, because if you overrun too much, because today is the last meeting, and therefore we also have to manage the time properly. Well, that's my own question next. So I'll be very brief. Okay, for these posts, I would attach more importance to the regulation of moneylenders. And indeed, if you look at existing policies, we can see that, well, we have seen advertisements saying that, okay, you should only take out loans if you are able to afford the repayments. And then in terms of publicity and education, yes, you're trying to enhance public awareness of the pros and cons of this. But then, despite all that, according to our contacts with some members of the public, well, there are very unscrupulous traders and many people have also been trapped into that because of different incentives and so on. And as a result, that has given rise to a lot of problems, for example, criminal intimidation and so on. And therefore, we would like to effectively crack down on these malpractices of moneylenders. And just now, we heard that with the creation of these posts, you would be considering amending the relevant legislation. I hope that you can be more positive or proactive, so that with the permanent post set up, you can come up with an amendment timetable. Because after all, administrative measures together with the amendment of legislation and also the review of the regulatory regime, I hope that these three can be done. Because right now, there are a lot of malpractices, and for the debt collection activities, sometimes they can be very appalling. So how can you ensure that for the criminal acts arising from these malpractices, you will have to crack down on those, and of course you will have to deal with the problem at source. But then there are many of these consequences as a result of the malpractices, and as a result the public have been adversely affected. So what are you going to do about this? And next, about AIIB. Well, this is our state's policy or initiative. And of course, Hong Kong's involvement would definitely be good and has its meaning. And therefore, how can we be sure that we are not just an ordinary member of AIIB? We would be able to play a more important role. Yes, we do have a role to play, but then how are we able to ensure that Hong Kong will be able to play an important role so that we can have more economic and financial return? For example, are we able to create more jobs and so on? So can you tell us more about these? Well, on moneylenders' problem, yes, we agree, Chairman, that under this policy area, much of it has to do with the law, and others would have to do with law enforcement and so on. And since last year, we've been reviewing the policy internally, And we have also made reference to the Consumers Council's report in 2019. It's about consumers' protection. So there was a report published by the Consumer Council last year. So we'll be making reference to these, and as soon as possible, we'll come back to this council to consult members on our recommendations. For AIIB, I'd just like to bring up one point. Well, in terms of financial services, we do have our strengths and international experience. That's why, well, what we've been discussing with AIIB is whether or not we can set up an AIIB's Financial Services Center. So that's been an ongoing discussion. Yes. Next, Eddie Chu. Thank you, Chairman. The proposal to convert these two supernumerary posts to permanent posts. Well, they have been extended 5 times since 2010. So I'd like to ask the CSB, because in para 27, you said that you support the proposed creation of the permanent posts. So does that mean that on the past 4 or 5 occasions, how come you did not support the conversion, and only now you're prepared to support them? Well, I haven't seen the records, but then is it that, well, lawmakers on previous occasions had forced you to keep it or keep them as supernumerary posts because they wouldn't agree to convert them to permanent posts? So can you briefly tell us the history? Sorry, speaker's not coming through. Please switch on his microphone. Switch on his microphone, please. You will have to press the button. You have to press the button first. Thank you, Chairman. Well, on the previous occasions when we apply for the creation of these posts, I believe that on the part of the Bureau, that is the FSTB, they believe that they only needed 2 supernumerary posts, and we supported that. But then on this occasion, the Bureau was of a view that there was a permanent need for the post, and we supported their rationale. That's why we supported that. So that's the reason. Okay. Okay, coming back to the Bureau. In the paper, when you refer to the incumbents responsible for those tasks, there were 5 main parts. I think in para 19, you said that these are long-term and permanent in nature. But then when I look at it, I don't quite understand why you call these tasks long-term and permanent in nature. For example, the first one is about the new auditor regulatory regime, and you also said that the purpose is to assist the FRC so that it can become full-fledged and independent. So for the first task, I do not see why that should be long-term and permanent in nature. And the second and third too, because you're talking about establishing a new statutory corporate rescue procedure, and also you're enhancing your regulation on moneylenders and so on. So these are about legislation and establishing a system. So for 1, 2, and 3, I do not see why they would come under what you described in para 19 as long-term and permanent in nature. And then for AIIB, I don't think it's going to fold up. So you would, I think you must have meant to run it for several decades at least. So for the first 3, I don't quite understand them. So can you explain? Okay, thank you, Mr. Chu, for your questions. Very often in terms of the duties and responsibilities of certain posts, when they are supposed to establish a new regulatory regime, then members might think that upon the completion of that regulatory regime, that's the end of the story. But then sometimes if the regulatory regime has just been created from scratch, then a lot of work will be involved. And also even after the establishment of the regulatory regime, in terms of the implementation, execution, and also review after a while. So a lot of work would also be involved, and that would also be done on a long-term basis. So since 2010 and since 2006 to now, you're talking about 14 years. So that post been working on the establishment of the new regulatory regime, and if you've been doing that for 14 years, then the portfolio would have been very, very long. In fact, the portfolio is very long. I can give you an example in order to help illustrate that. For example, if you look at the duty list, it's about corporate governance and also insolvency legislation and so on, as you might recall. In the past, well, at the time when this post was first created, that's the time when we were undertaking this revamp of the company's ordinance, and the manpower resources needed were very tremendous. But then upon the enactment of the amendment bill, yes, we have set up a new regime, but then for insolvency and also miscellaneous matters, that would come under another piece of legislation. And subsequently, in terms of the legislative arrangement, we understand that it's less than perfect. And we haven't been able to really fully implement the policy recommendations back then. For example, we are talking about the CO, which is a very major piece of legislation, but then still we haven't really amended everything. For example, for cross-boundary liquidation process and also for the company's ordinance, when we started the revamping, much of the work hasn't been done, and therefore that's just one of the duty lists, or that's one of the duties on the list. So you can see that if you look at the distribution of work, it's not just something that can be completed in 3 or 5 years. In fact, that would require long-term attention. Okay, next, Dr. Low Wai Kwok. Thank you, Chairman. Well, I'm speaking in support of the proposed creation of the 2 permanent posts, because according to what the FSTB described about these 2 permanent posts, basically, for Hong Kong as a financial center, in terms of our policy, our regulatory regime, well, they are responsible for that, and they are also responsible for implementing them, and therefore it's very important, and is also a forward-looking initiative for Hong Kong as a financial center. We have to work on fintech, so that whether it's government policies or measures, we have to be very proactive, and they are very meaningful tasks indeed. More importantly, it's about the AIIB and ADB. Well, Hong Kong is also a member of these 2.
In terms of participating in such regional bodies, this is certainly significant. The AIB is relatively new, but still it has close to 100 countries and regions as members. And this is a form of regional collaboration. In terms of participating in such multilateral infrastructure agreements, opportunities will be created for the financial services, engineering, construction, etc. Compared with the ADB, the AIB is relatively new, and they only started issuing bonds about a year ago, so there's still much room for development. This relatively new body has attracted close to 100 members. It shows that different countries and regions see potential in the AIB's development, and the importance of mutual collaboration. So there's still much room for development.
亦都唔係一個主要係討論亞投行。
Today might not be the main platform for discussing the development of AIB and ADB, but we certainly support such initiatives. Chairman, I support the creation of these posts, and I have no follow-up questions.
喺另外將來相關事務委員會或者係議事。
At relevant panels, we can continue to follow up on these issues. Such initiatives are very important for Hong Kong's development as a financial hub. Do you require a response from the government? I would welcome a response from them. Thank you very much. In terms of fintech development and the work on AIB and ADB, these are items of priority for us. For multilateral development banks, they have been active in recent years because we see major voids in infrastructure development of many developing economies, and this would hamper their economic development. If the AIB and other multilateral investment banks can fill the void, they can benefit the relevant economies, and this would create opportunities for Hong Kong. So there would be mutual benefits. Next, Mr. Ray Chan. Chairman, at the beginning of the meeting, I asked about the ordering of our agenda items. According to the paper, these two posts are not urgent. One would take effect from the 1st of January 2021, the other from the 1st of January 2022. If any member requests separate voting at the Finance Committee, and if this item could not be introduced into the Finance Committee, there would not be any repercussions on the work of these posts. There's still time to deal with this item at the next term of LegCo. After these posts lapse, who will take up the work? Well, apparently the work will continue. I asked about the question of loans. If you remove the functions on the AIB, of course, the proposal would be less controversial. Of course, this is not something you would do. I'd like to know why the functions of the post would include work on the AIB. And what percentage would the workload on the AIB take up? Thank you very much. For the AOSGB post, in terms of workload, the biggest workload would be on governance of Hong Kong companies, including the statutory corporate rescue procedure and the money lenders ordinance. And in terms of the auditor regulatory regime, we just amended the regime, so the workload would be lesser going forward. As for the work on various international banks, it involves many different government departments, and this would not make up the bulk of work for these posts. So can I say it would make up less than 10% of the workload? My question is, why would the AIB fall under the scope of these posts? This is about the division of work. Under the FSTB, there are only 3 deputy secretaries. The first would be responsible for securities transactions. The second deputy secretary would take care of insurance and MPF related posts. Meanwhile, I'm responsible for corporate governance in Hong Kong, as well as other policies that do not form separate policy ambits. So at the end of the day, for every policy, they would be addressed somewhere. Does it refer to miscellaneous policy areas? As we assign work, there would be policies that do not fall under a specific ambit, and they must be taken up somehow. Some members will speak for the third time. For members who are yet to speak, please press the button as soon as possible. We have spent an hour on this item already, and I will draw the line. We would have to deal with the creation of a government architect post for the 10-year hospital development program. Since this is also a matter of interest, since today would be the final meeting, I hope we would have time to deal with the next item. So for members who are yet to speak, please press the button as soon as possible, and in a moment I will draw the line. Dr. K. Kwok speaking for the third time. Please allow time before you actually draw the line. Dr. K. Kwok speaking for the third time. In terms of enhancing the moneylender regulations, improving the standard of accountants, etc., I have no objections. The matter is whether we need to make the supernumerary posts permanent. But this has always been a very difficult question. The establishment is ever growing, and many supernumerary posts have been made permanent. This is certainly cause for concern, because this would not be conducive to the efficiency of the government. So perhaps this is a question for the Civil Service Bureau. And how does the work of AIB compare with the other challenges we have to face? And how would this be conducive to financial development in Hong Kong? Many AIB projects have been grounded. Many nations have quit. The list is extremely long. And some national leaders have stepped down because of corruption and other reasons. If the work on AIB is not a significant part of the work, then it should be removed. I don't see how Hong Kong would have any role in the Belt and Road initiative. Can you tell us about Hong Kong's role in the next 3 to 5 years? And in face of the grounded projects, what can we do? I will draw the line at 9:45 a.m. So for members yet to ask questions, please press the button as soon as possible. Thank you very much. Of course, the trajectory of the work on AIB would fluctuate according to the global fluctuations. As a member of AIB, Hong Kong has made contributions, and we hope to facilitate participation by local enterprises. In the future, the AIB might exercise money or the bond issuing functions, and if we can make use of our expertise in providing corporate treasury services to the AIB, then there will be mutual benefits to the AIB and local enterprises. Dr. Fernando Chang. Chairman, the government said we can exercise our experience in AIB in areas such as financing, governance, and battling corruption. But when I look at the development of the BNR initiative since 2013, there were scandals, instances of corruption, and with the epidemic, many projects had to be grounded because many of them relied on China. For the Belt and Road Initiative contractors, more than 90% are mainland enterprises, and more than 50% of the raw materials come from China. Even many of the workers are also from China, and all these would be affected by the epidemic. And with China's economy taking a big hit as well, there could be issues. Many projects have been grounded. Some of them have even been abandoned.
So my question is for fundraising for AIIB, overwhelming majority of that would be for China. So for the so-called anti-corruption initiatives, you cannot call the short because one of the biggest problems with AIIB is about the corruption in China, and they are trying to export that to other countries. So how are you able to play your role? Well, you're in the face of this major superpower. We are just an end. Our capability would be nothing when compared to this superpower. Well, it's already 9:45. I've already drawn a line. So 3 more members, Wu Chi-chun, Chen Ray Chen, and also Kwok Kap-ki. Okay, I'll draw a line there. Okay, I'll be very brief. Fernando Jiang's question is about the countries under the AIIB. Many of them are developing countries, and they have different governance problems, and that's a reality that we have to face. And of course, this may not be the right forum for us to discuss that. But then, very often, for the projects under the Belt and Road Initiative, well, those may not be the governance problems of AIIB. They might have different backgrounds. And also, what about the governance of AIIB? Well, for the mainstream projects under AIIB, So that would be done in the form of PPP, public-private partnership. The reason being that for the purpose of the management process of the project, it would be more transparent. It would also be more aligned with international practices. But of course, there is this disadvantage. That is, when international economy is suffering a downturn, then for the private sector, there might be problems. Because whichever way you try to use to deal with these issues, there are bound to be risks. So that's by way of clarification to help Mr. Zhang in understanding this. Well, Chairman, what I was saying was about the AIIB. Many of the Belt and Road initiatives projects, there are already a lot of corruption and also governance scandals. We don't need to cite them because that has been reported in many journals and also papers and so on. So what I'm concerned about is that given the very little role that we can play, so in this very big swirl, what kind of role can we play? So my inclination is that I'd rather that Hong Kong withdraw from the work altogether than being involved in it, so that we can focus on our own financial services sector. Okay, your time is up. But then I think the administration has already made some clarification. But then for the purpose of time management, we will have to move on. Next, Wu Chi-wai. He's not here. And then Ray Chen. Well, I haven't really asked about AIIB. I have two sets of questions. I hope that you can be more relaxed so that I can finish with both. Yes, please. Okay, on money laundering. That's in para 13. You said that we are talking about an investigation of no collateral, unsecured personal loan business, and then we will also try to consider whether or not we might need to enhance our regulatory regime. So my question is, when will you be able to complete that survey? Because earlier on, the Consumer Council also came up with 9 initiatives on regulating money lenders. So this is the first group of questions. And the second group is about AIIB, which I haven't had a chance to ask. Okay, in the wake of the pandemic and also because of the conflict between China and the US, and there are new factors arising. So will the administration do a reassessment on the involvement of AIIB and also the benefit that would be created by AIIB, which might be a far cry from what you had told us before? And also, if the AIIB were to set up an office in Hong Kong, how many jobs can be created? And also for bond issuance, what kind of benefit would that bring to Hong Kong? So I don't know if you've done any assessment on the latest situation. So 2 groups of questions. Yes, thank you, Mr. Ray Chen. Well, on the money lending market, as we have set out in the paper, well, we talk about a thematic survey. We just completed the first round of the survey, and now we are moving on to a tracking survey. We hope that we'll be able to collect at least 2 years' figures in order to help us understand the situation with regard to unsecured personal loan business in the market. And also, in the Consumer Council's report last year, there were many recommendations, and we'll be working with the Consumer Council. And we have had several meetings with them already to see what we can do to help improve the money lending markets regulation. And in my earlier answer to members' questions, we said that in due course we'll be coming back to this council to brief members on the initiatives that we plan to introduce to regulate the money lending market. That would also incorporate the recommendations by the Consumer Council. So the thematic survey is underway. What about the timetable afterwards? Well, Chairman, as I said, we'll be coming back to this council to report on the policy initiatives that we propose. We will also be telling you the observations and also the analysis that we have done in the light of the survey. Okay, what about AIIB? Can you also explain a bit about that? Well, the questions asked were about the AIIB's bond issuance and also setting up of a fundraising platform. So what are the benefits? I don't have the figures with me. And if members are interested, we can supply that later. Okay. Last, Dr. K.K. Kwok. Thank you. Well, this is the last round. I suspect that I might not be able to ask all the questions that I want. I hope that the administration can give us some a paper in writing, because I hope that this can be voted on separately at the FC. I hope that the administration can explain to us that is what is our role in AIIB, because many people are concerned, and I myself am concerned about that too, because there are many projects under AIIB which have been labeled, according to many critics and also according to many observers. Actually, China is actually exporting loans to other countries. We should not be involved at all in this, because under the one country, two systems principle, we do have a very unique role to play. I'm not against you issuing bonds or offering quality accounting services and so on. But then if we were to move one step forward, getting involved in the negotiation process and so on, that's kind of risky. And also including you, if many officials are involved, then you might be taking up huge responsibilities that might overburden you, because if officials of other countries are being sued or prosecuted for corruption, then what kind of role are you going to play? Will you be able to take up those responsibilities? And therefore, as officials of the SARG, you should not get yourselves involved in suspected malpractices or irregularities. And therefore, from the beginning till now, what have we done to protect our civil servants so that in such processes they will not be unnecessarily involved? Can you be brief in your reply? Yes, I'll be brief, because as I said, we will try to take advantage of these opportunities to benefit different sectors in Hong Kong so that they can have more development space. But then at the same time, we are also bringing in our international experience and expertise so that that would also be conducive to the development of AIIB. For ASEAN officials participating in the work of AIIB, of course, we will stick to the established professionalism, and in particular, where there is potential conflict of interest, we do have a very robust regulatory regime. So it's the same as what we have to do when it comes to local projects. So please rest assured, even if we are involved in AIIB projects, we would not be unnecessarily involved in irregularities or malpractices and so on. Well, it's not a lopsided situation, so please do not just believe in those speculations and so on. Mr. Wu Chi-wei, every time when I heard the response from the officials, they often said that, well, the best thing about Hong Kong is that we will be able to bring in our expertise and international experience in those institutions and so on. So I'd like to know what are the inadequacies of AIIB right now, and also as an international platform set up by so many countries. Well, of course, I would believe that, during the initial years, of course, it would have achieved a certain standard. You're talking about an official, you're talking about their responsibilities, and you've also put in a paragraph setting out their role in the AIIB. And according to what you said, it's not just about bringing in business to Hong Kong, and you're also trying to enhance their governance standards. So what kind of contribution can we make? So what kind of inadequacies does it have so that our officials will be able to help them improve? So that's for me to comment on whether or not we should grant you the funding that you propose. And if you're not able to answer right now, then you will have to give us something in writing, because you will have to set up what are the inadequacies of AIIB right now in the eyes of the Hong Kong officials, and what is our input, and to what extent will we be able to improve their governance? So that's point number one. And secondly, I would also be interested in listening to you. That is the conversion of the supernumerary post to permanent post. You talk about many things on the list that have to be done, but then according to the paper, roughly by 2022-23, most of those that have been set out in the paper requiring legislation including insolvency, liquidation, and also the moneylenders ordinance and so on, that should be completed by 2022-23. So after that, what major things would have to be put on the shopping list? And that's why that would also justify the conversion of the supernumerary posts to permanent ones. And next, you would also have to explain to me, because just now you said that we have this Invest Hong Kong, which will be collaborating with you so that they would be promoting fintech together with you. But then on different occasions, we have already talked about this. For these ETOs or Invest Hong Kong officers, thank you, Chairman. So it's Invest Hong Kong. So can you quantify the KPIs instead of just telling us that officials will be going there to organize a few forums and also roadshows, and then you would call that your performance? So with the supervisors post being established, what kind of better coordination can you achieve? Yes, thank you, Chairman. On AIIB and also the SARG's involvement and the way and the role we play. What about improving their governance standards? Well, for Invest Hong Kong, well, for the part that they do in terms of fintech, so we'll be giving them the resources and we are responsible for that, and therefore their work can be quantified and the results can also be quantified. For example, how many external IT companies that they have contacted, and also in promoting work overseas, what kind of achievements have they made, and so on. So in the process, they would be working closely with the investment promotion units under the ETOs overseas, and they can also quantify their performance and work. They can also come up with a proposal for our consideration. That's the basis for funds to be given to them. What about future work after 2023? So what about legislation outside of what is set out in the paper? Well, for our future work, there are two parts. First, in the paper, we have set out legislative policies and scope. In 2 or 3 years, it's not possible for us to complete all of them. Even if that has been completed, as I said, for the accountants auditing regulatory regime, upon the amendments, there would also have to be reviews and implementation and so on. It's a continuing process.
嚟緊嗰2-3年，譬如我做一個企業拯救嘅。
When we come up with new corporate rescue procedure regulations, we might need to review the company's ordinance as well. For the new auditor regime, we might need to conduct a review after 2 or 3 years in order to enhance any inadequacies. So these are all part of the regular policy work. We are not saying that the work would stop after the laws are amended or made. But the possible redundancy lies in the fact that you would be constantly creating new posts. Please offer a written response to Mr. Wu. I now put the item to the vote. A division is claimed. The bell will ring for 5 minutes. I remind members that we would proceed to a vote on the proposed creation of permanent posts at the FSTB. We now proceed to the vote. Please check your votes. The voting is closed. The results are shown. 24 present, 14 for, 9 against. I declare the proposal passed. Do members request separate voting at the Finance Committee? All right, that's all for item 2. Item number 3. Proposed creation of one supernumerary post of government architect in the Architectural Services Department to provide overall steer and supervise the implementation of the healthcare projects under the first 10-year hospital development plan. On the 20th of March, the government consulted the panel on health services. With us today, we have Dr. Choi Taek-yi, Undersecretary for Food and Health, Ms. Trista Lim, Principal Assistant Secretary for Food and Health, Mrs. Sylvia Lam, Director of Architectural Services, and Mr. Ben Yang, Senior Project Manager. I now invite Dr. N. Chang to brief members on the matters discussed at the panel. At the meeting on the 20th of March, the Health Services panel discussed the creation of a supernumerary post of government architect for about 7 years to provide overall steer and oversight on the first 10-year hospital development plan. Members did not object to the introduction of the proposal at the Establishment Subcommittee. Members noted that the RKSD is the funding controlling officer of the first 10-year hospital development plan, and they are also the works agent of certain projects. Due to the vast increase of workload due to various hospital works, the RKSD must set up a new project management branch led by dedicated director staff to provide steer and oversight for the cross-disciplinary team and to provide works management services for the first 10-year hospital development plan and assist in preliminary planning for the second 10-year plan. Members believe that the government should explain the justifications for the proposed government architect supernumerary post and the period of 7 years and details of the oversight provided by the posts for healthcare projects under the HDP. The relevant information has been circulated to members. This project is about hospital development, which might be an area of interest. The meeting could be extended by a maximum of 15 minutes to 10:45 a.m. Today is the final meeting of the term. I see some members are waiting to speak. I would see whether we can proceed to a vote on this item, depending on the circumstances. The floor is now open for questions. Dr. K.K. Kwok. Thank you. First of all, I support the funding proposal. The first 10-year hospital development plan will last till 2027. I have concerns if it could be completed because we only have 7 years left. For the new hospital, the foundation works are ongoing and redevelopment for the other hospitals have not started. In the next 7 years, is the government confident of completing the 10-year hospital development plan? if we can carry out planning for the second 10-year plan ahead of time, Hong Kong people would not have to wait 20 years to see more hospital beds. Can the government promise early planning for the second HDP? Dr. Choi. Under the first HDP, there are 16 projects in total. 4 have been upgraded to Category A, and another 4 completed discussions at LegCo, and hopefully they could be passed at the Finance Committee. And for 10 of the projects, work has started. So basically, all these projects have been triggered. In the next few years, the workload of the projects would increase. That is why this post is necessary. At 7 clusters, there are 19 projects in total, and a total of more than 9,000 beds would be created. As for the advanced work and planning, work is already underway. Thank you. Dr. K. Kwok. Next, Mr. Siu Ka-fai. Thank you. The Undersecretary said in the next HDP, 9,000 beds will be created. What is the current number of beds available? I was referring to the second HDP. For the first HDP, more than 6,000 beds would be provided. 6,000. The first HDP involves more than 6,000 beds. The second HDP involves more than 9,000 beds. The current number of beds at the HA is about 26,000. Hong Kong's population is aging, and we are just behind Japan in this regard. Do you believe there will be enough beds in the next 10 years? The post will provide oversight and planning on the next 10-year plan. Do you believe there will be enough beds? In terms of the planning of hospital beds, the first and second HDP would follow the population and aging projections by the Census and Statistics Department. So these 2 HDPs will provide some 6,000 and 9,000 beds respectively, and they also involve operating theaters and other facilities to address the future needs. Tackling population aging is not just about providing hospital beds. We need daycare services and flexible use of facilities. Apparently, you have plans for the next 10 years. What would be the point of having this or creating this post? I would defer to the director. What would be the work of the new branch and post? A lot of works would be involved in the first HDP.
At present, we have 3 PDs at directorate level. But then because of the HDP, we started the planning. But then when the projects would be coming on stream, well, for the annual spending on the projects, well, in 2016, we were talking about some 200 million. And then by 2020, it's already $2.7 billion. And then at the peak of it, that would happen 3 years down the road, because we will have different projects coming on stream. And then for the principal works, we will also be seeking funding approval, and therefore at the peak, we are talking about some $57 billion a year. And then as far as the ASD is concerned, well, before the rolling out of the first HDP, that's in 2010, well, in the policy initiatives, well, for new projects every year, we're talking about just $9 billion. And now you're talking about some $27 billion. In fact, I would like to have a separate team set up so that they would be dedicated to the HDP, so that that would make the rolling out of these projects more smooth, and also in terms of quality control, we'll be able to do an even better job. Anything to add? No. Next, Fernando Zhang. Thank you, Chairman. Well, for the first HDP and second HDP, according to my understanding, is the ASD that will be responsible for the monitoring, design of the projects, and your service target would be the HA, the Hospital Authority. Is that understanding correct? Yes, Undersecretary or Director? Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, for the HDP, or the construction of hospitals, so we are the controlling officer of these. And then we have Schedule 2 hospitals. Those are the subvented hospitals, and also Schedule 1 hospitals. Well, all along for Schedule 1 hospitals, the ASD would also become the project agent. Well, for the HDP, given the size of the project, there is a chance that some of these projects might be undertaken by the HA itself. They would be the project agent, and then they would entrust the works to us. But then for QMH, Kwai Chung Hospital, or some of the community centers, and also rehab centers and so on, we would be the project agent. But then for the other hospitals, other than the controlling officer for the provision, we'll be working with the FHB, and also the HA will be working together with them, so that they will have to meet government standards and also specifications. We would also be acting as a consultant to those projects. Okay, we have 2 HDPs. We absolutely support those, and we are of the view that we have to press ahead with them as soon as possible. There should be no delay, because all along we have a shortage of hospital beds at the AED, and also the waiting time for going to the wards, and also for the operating theaters time. The waiting time would also be very long, and also for screening work, it has been very slow. That's why we absolutely support the 2 projects. But then I'm concerned about the design and also the construction of these projects. There might be some impacts on the patients, because given the HA being an oversized organization, and also if it's just the ASD taking up all the projects, and there are many projects under the 2 projects, then what about the patient's voice? Can that be heard? And what about their families' voices? Can those be heard too? Because if you look at the duty list, well, item E says that you would also be consulting the district councils and the legislative council and so on. And you also talk about relevant bodies or stakeholders. We hope that under each and every project, you will allow a place for the patients. Yes, the HA does have patients groups, but then we hope that for those who will be directly affected by your projects, the patients and the patients groups should be given more chances to express their views, because ultimately they are the users. And of course, that would also involve the healthcare professionals, and through the HA establishment, they can also have their voices heard. But then for the users, including the professionals and also the frontline staff, their views and input would also be very important. Please pay attention to that, so that all the stakeholders can have a role to play. That's very important, because upon completion of the project, whether or not is something that they want, That's very important. I'd like to say something that's very important because, as we can see, we have two members on the road, Xiu Ka-chun and N. Chiang. So I'd like to know if anyone else would like to speak, because we understand that you're all very concerned about the HDP, and my understanding is that you'd like to have it passed as soon as possible. So for time management, if there is no one else who would like to speak, I'll draw a line there so that we can deal with this item today. So I'll be giving you the floor. So, Undersecretary, would you like to respond to what Fernando Zhang just said? Yes, Chairman. Well, given the hardware of the hospital, because upon completion, it has to be used for at least 3 or 4 decades, and therefore, the HA within its establishment, it would also have to look at whether or not the facilities will be able to meet the professional standards that they require. And also for patients' needs, they would also have to take on board their input. For example, for barrier-free access and also designs of toilets so that the users would find them convenient. And also in the design process and also before the commissioning of the hospitals, they would also have to engage the professionals to see if the access is barrier-free and so on. So these are the details that we will pay attention to. And of course, for project professionals and also professional design teams, they would also have to get a lot of feedback from the stakeholders so that the HA can also make reference to them. Next, Mr. Xiu Ka-chun. Thank you, Chairman. Well, just now, Fernando Zhang referred to patients' voices, and I'm also one of the users of public hospitals because I'm also a patient, and therefore I can also voice my opinions. I think my voice is very simple. I support that this be implemented as soon as possible. I've read the paper. In paragraph 9G, you talk about the new post, who will be responsible for ensuring that there will be no cost overrun. So that's something that we are very concerned about. Would there be cost overruns? And then 2 or 3 years down the road, and then the entire project will see its cost overrun by a certain percentage. We don't want that to happen. And then in April this year, the FHB director, that is Sylvia Chen, said that that would bring a change for the healthcare system so that you can prepare for the future, so that isolation facilities will be added, so that under the 2 HDPs there is room for adjustment, and they can explore the possibilities of increasing isolation wards and facilities, or whether or not they need to build 1 or 2 more blocks of infectious diseases centers, and they would also be reviewing the cluster arrangement under the HA, given the severity of the pandemic, and is really changing history, and therefore we will have to prepare for rainy days, and we will have to plan for the future. So at the health services panel, we also discussed that, but then you told us that the 2 HDPs have been completed and there is very little room for further adjustment. But then subsequently, the Bureau Director came out to say that there can be further adjustments to the 2 projects. And also for the new posts, the incumbents would also have to ensure that there will be no cost overruns. And yet at the same time, the Secretary said that there can be more isolation facilities. So how can you strike a balance? How can you achieve the target? That is, at one point you said that the HDP were already finalized, and then you were concerned about cost overrun, and then she said that she can review and make adjustments. So you would be paying attention to the funding approval to ensure that there will be no cost overrun. So what is the matter? What is your ultimate objective? Well, under the first HDB, some projects were planned well ahead, and others are still being planned. And therefore, in the detailed design, there is always room for adjustment. And you talk about the number of isolation wards and so on. Definitely, there will be room for fine-tuning. Even if the layout plan has been completed, we can still do some fine-tuning. But of course, through the professionals, for example, the ASD colleagues, under the overall funding framework, we will see what we can do. Definitely, there is some room for fine-tuning. And then under the second HDP, as they have yet to happen, so we have got some rough ideas as to what needs to be done. Yet we haven't really finalized the design, and therefore there is room for adjustment. Even under the first HDP, well, some of the projects have been finalized. Still, there would be room for adjustment. Okay, nothing to add. I'll extend the meeting by about 15 minutes, or no more than 15 minutes to deal with this. Yes, N. Chiang. My question is simple, Chairman. I'd like to know, well, can we have a table that is under the first HDP for each and every project? When can that be completed? And for the second HDP, so when can works start, and also what's the expected completion date? So can you give us this timetable? And then for the two projects, we're going to have an additional 15,000 beds. So how many more doctors do we need? As we know, at present, the HA has been having a shortage of doctors. So by then, if we still have that shortage, so what would the situation be? Okay, with 15,000 additional beds, how many more medical doctors do we need? So what's your projection? Will we be able to have enough medical doctors serving those extra hospital beds? Under Secretary, yes, on the first and second HDP for each and every project, and also the expected timetable for the first HDP, many of them have commenced already, so we can of course give you the timetable for their completion. And then for the second HDP, is still very much in the initial planning process. We might not be able to immediately come up with a timetable, but then we will try our best to provide information. Second is about our healthcare manpower. Well, with the hardware, we also need to have enough manpower in order to service that, for example, diagnosis and also laboratory personnel and so on. So the most important thing is the FHB has this triennial plan, so we'll be rolling that out. And also for interdisciplinary services and how we have to revamp the work of individual healthcare professionals so that they can serve different parts, and also taking medical doctors as an example. During the past couple of years, we tried our best to retain the talents so that they will still stay in the public sector, and we will increase the number of university places, and also for restricted registration for doctors and so on, so that they can also come and work in Hong Kong. And Chiang, anything else that you'd like to add? If none, so that's all for the questions and answers. So we will put this to the vote, and I'll put the item to the vote. Is there any claim for division? Okay. Will those in favor of this please raise their hands? Secretariat, please count the votes. Okay, unanimous. So no objection. Okay, I declare the item passed. Is there any claim for separate voting for this item at the FC meeting? If none, then there is no need for this to be put to separate vote. Okay, we have already completed item 3 on the agenda. Okay, I receive an inquiry from some members. Today we do have a final item. Well, I've already extended the meeting by 15 minutes, and there is a suggestion that we should start with the fourth item to see if there are any questions. We can ask questions. Well, all I can say is, if we were to start our discussion on this item, I only have 15 minutes. So we only have 15 minutes, okay? You'd like to start? Okay, so we only have 15 minutes, and then we'll invite the officials to join us.
長氣啊！
請官員進場啦。
We shall invite the administration in.
好啊，咁嘅政府官員總場我簡單啦嚇，咁呢個咧就係
The proposed creation of positions of one chief accident and safety investigator and one deputy chief accident and safety investigator to lead the independent air accident investigation authority to comply with the ongoing and binding requirement of the International Civil Aviation Organization. With us, we have Mr. Joseph Lai, Permanent Secretary for Transport and Housing, Mr. Was Lau, Deputy Secretary, and Mr. Leung Man-fat, Chief Inspector. The Economic Development Panel was consulted on the 27th of April. Since Mr. Felix Chung is not present, I would brief members on the salient points of discussion. The establishment proposal seeks to turn permanent the non-civil service post of Chief Accident and Safety Investigator, as well as the creation of a new non-civil service post of Deputy Chief Accident and Safety Investigator, and the creation of a new Assistant Director General of Civil Aviation post. Members generally did not object to the creation of the Chief and Deputy Chief Accident Safety Investigator posts, but some members requested the government to further explain why they did not take out suitable measures to avoid the relevant arrangement and to provide details of the Memorandum of Understanding signed between the AIA and the Civil Aviation Department. My question is very simple. Earlier, helicopters from the People's Liberation Army encountered an accident or crash, but the proposal involves only civil aviation incidents. If aircrafts of the People's Liberation Army leads to casualties or damages, can the Chief Accident and Safety Investigator or CASI have any investigation powers? Thank you. For accidents involving military aircrafts, the work would not be under the ambit of the AIA because AIA only deals with civil aviation. For accidents involving civil aircrafts, investigations would be conducted from both sides under the AIA, and this is in line with international practice. If the lives and properties of the public are involved, would the AIA have any role to play for incidents caused by military aircraft? Under such scenario, the AIA and the military would carry out the investigations under their respective ambits. Next, Dr. Lo Wai Kok. Thank you. Chairman, I speak in support of the creation of these two permanent non-civil service positions. The work is certainly necessary in order to comply with the binding requirement of the ICAO. There are relevant legislative amendments on the investigation of civil aviation accidents, and there are justifications. One NCS position has already been created. The post of CASI lapsed on the 31st of March this year. That is why we are creating the positions of Chief Accident and Safety Instigator and Deputy Chief. The recruitment of the CASI position would take time, and as such, there is a need to create a supernumerary post of Assistant Director General of Civil Aviation to fill the void of the CASI until the position is recruited. But this, in any case, it would not be later than the 31st of March 2022. I wonder why such proposal was not raised earlier. So for work that should be done, why did we see a delay? But nonetheless, I support the proposal. Permanent Secretary, we admit that the situation is not ideal. In July 2017, the Finance Committee approved this position, and subsequently, we spent some time before we could recruit the CASI. It was a global recruitment exercise. Since the position is a professional one, in September 2018, the Chief Accident and Safety Investigator assumed office, and we had to make observations for a period of time before we could report to the FC. We plan to offer recommendations to the panel in January, but due to the epidemic, and since there were other more urgent issues at the panel, the agenda item has been postponed till April this year. And subsequently, this proposal is introduced to the establishment subcommittee. Mr. Wuchiwai, first round. The current AAIA is still in operation. Currently, someone is acting in the position of the CASI. Mr. Leung Man Fat is the most experienced non-directorate civil servant in the authority. So in other words, he is the person in charge of the authority. He is exercising the relevant powers, but since he is a non-directorate, well, he is still a non-directorate civil servant. He's not part of the directorate staff, but he can still act in the position and exercise the relevant powers. What is the difference between him acting in this post and the new position to be recruited. If you say that Mr. Leung is not qualified, then it would be an issue. Why would a directorate post be needed in discharging the duties, including the global recruitment and the exercising of powers? I believe you were referring to the transitional arrangement. From past experience, the transitional period would take a year and a half at the minimum. Since we are talking about accident investigation, we cannot anticipate the amount of investigation required or the severity of any accidents. So a non-directorate position is taking up the work in the meantime. Mr. Leung is vastly experienced, but yet he's not part of the directorate staff. If we require a non-directorate staff to act in this position for an extended period, let's say a year or more, it might not be fair to Mr. Leung. In case of major incidents, since Mr. Leung is a non-directorate civil servant, we must consider whether he can deal with such scenarios. This is not about the capability of Mr. Leung himself. Mr. Leung is an experienced investigator, and he is acting in the relevant position and exercising powers. You said the current arrangement is unfair to Mr. Leung. If that is the case, you should provide enough support to Mr. Leung in his acting position so that an appropriate head can be recruited for the AAIA. As a transitional arrangement, you are creating new positions. You need to convince some people that the AIA is independent in nature. So in terms of the recruitment of relevant posts, with the future head on board, would the recruitment be conducted within the AIA, or would it be done on a government level? No members are waiting to speak. Do members agree with a further extension of no more than 15 minutes to deal with this item? Barring any objections, this is something I would do. No objections, all right. Permanent Secretary, thank you. We place much emphasis on the independence of this authority. The AAIA is independent of the Civil Aviation Department in line with international requirements. But the authority does not need to be independent from the government. In the current and future establishment, the AAIA is under the ambit of the Transport and Housing Bureau, and it reports directly to the Secretary, and administrative-wise, they would report to me.
So for the future recruitment exercise for the AAIA, as Mr. Wu put it, so that will be done by the THB. So the THB will be responsible for that. But then Mr. Wu was asking about the transitional arrangement. Well, with the agreement of this subcommittee if that post can be created. So in the next year or so, what is to be done? Well, as Mr. Wu just put it, I will be implementing what you just suggested. All along, we've been enhancing the work of the AAIA, in particular the support by non-directorate officers, and then Mr. Leung can tell you more about this. So we have also recruited colleagues from outside of the government establishment so that they could provide better support for the AAIA. So it's not just a transitional arrangement. In fact, even after the recruitment of the head, we will still have to have their support. Well, 3 colleagues have been recruited. So we have already received some applications, and tomorrow it will be the deadline for application. So with these new colleagues joining, we'll be able to improve or increase the progress of our work. Okay, that's all for the questions, and we'll be putting the matter to the vote. Any claim for division? So will those in favor please raise their hands? Secretariat, please count the votes.
係12個委員。
12 members in favor. Those against, please raise their hands. 1 against. Okay, I declare that the majority of the members present are in favor, so the motion is passed. Would members like to ask that the matter be voted separately at the FC meeting? Okay, so we have dealt with all the matters on hand, so meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.